Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We're going to be looking this afternoon about talking with children about COVID-19. Although realistically, this sort of model of working we can use with children to talk about any particular issue that might be concerning them. My name's Pat Garland-Smith, and I'm one of the service managers at Care First. I'm also the training manager, so I have a dual role within the organisation. Prior to joining Care First, I was actually a child protection social worker. So I've had lots of practice with speaking with children, both young and younger people and older children also. And having experience with it doesn't make us an expert. I just think I need to say that really, because only you know your child or your children, and you know how to talk with them and what's best for them. So we're going to go through these slides this afternoon, and please feel if you have any questions to type them in at the end, and I will make sure I address as many of those as possible. So thank you. So when COVID-19 began, it was quite usual for many of us to feel quite overwhelmed by the impact of it. Many of us sort of held it at arm's length and thought, well, it's not going to impact us here in the UK, but of course it did. And initially there was that thing that we didn't know what was happening. There was either a lack of understanding, or we'd spent far too much time watching the news and news alerts and getting very anxious about what we were hearing and seeing. There are also feelings around being quite depressed about the whole situation and feeling quite low ourselves. Maybe we were fearful and disbelieving. Many was lonely and sad. And some, it fed into some sort of already existing obsessive behaviour. So, for example, when the government were giving rules around hand washing and staying safe and staying indoors, anyone with a tendency to be a little bit obsessive about things took that on board, and for many it became worse. So, for example, hand washing. That's one of the things we associate with OCD. Well, of course, we were all told to hand wash. So people with a predisposition toward being obsessive about things, they were washing their hands even more, and probably still are. But children also can be vulnerable, and they can also have the same sorts of feelings, such as fear and anxiety. And it's fair to say that a lot of the fear and anxiety is picked up from the adults around them. There was also some confusion, particularly when children had to leave their schools and suddenly they weren't going back. So it was the question around what's happening, why aren't we going to school anymore, where are my friends? And there was some confusion about suddenly you're inside the house and your parents or your carers were with you, and you didn't know quite why everyone was around all the time. There was a massive period of change. Some literally walked away from school or final year at school or first year or final year at university and couldn't say their goodbyes. So there was a lot of change. Working in the schoolroom is very different from working from home for children as well as adults. There was a lack of understanding. Little children didn't understand why suddenly they weren't going to playgroup and suddenly they weren't seeing their friends. So all of that was also true for many children. There was the loss of their teachers, the loss of all that routine that one has during a school or a day of education. There was sadness. Many little ones were getting quite upset about not being with their friends. And it didn't take long for the novelty to be with mum and dad all the time, or the carers all the time, to feel quite upset and unsettled. Many little ones felt overwhelmed, couldn't understand what was happening. It wasn't within their framework to understand why they'd gone from one way of being to another. And they knew it wasn't a school holiday because you were asking them to work from home. So they too were feeling overwhelmed by what was going on around them. And that's when the questioning began. Now, it's really difficult when we talk to children about any sensitive subject. I'm sure all of you out there who are parents or carers will remember having to have some excruciating calls with discussions with young children. They see it as it is. They ask you straight to the point questions. There's no areas of grey. It's an absolute precise, what is this? Tell me about this. And we're often, as parents, wrong-footed with that. So having a supportive and open conversation with our children will help their understanding about any difficult and painful subject, not necessarily COVID specific. Being open and supportive helps them cope and understand at an age appropriate level. Now, I remember years ago, as I said, working as a child protection social worker, There were some that gave children lots and lots of information, which was way beyond their ability to cope with such information. And a lot of children became quite distressed and quite disoriented and quite overwhelmed by what they were hearing, because they didn't have the appropriate level of understanding for their age to manage the difficult things that they were having to talk about. So when you're talking to a child, no matter what the age, only discuss with them the things that you feel are safe subjects, and don't go too much depth with it. The question around death is very common. Where do we go when we die? What happens to us when we die? Now, according to how you are with your children, that's where they're going to get a lot of that information. So how do you act toward death? How do you respond to those difficult questions that we all have to have at some time? I learned very early on that if you ask a child a closed question, you're going to get a monosyllabic closed response. So, how was school today? Response, fine. Did you do anything interesting? No. And that's the way it goes. So, we need to be sensitive and open questions when we're talking to our children. So, for example, tell me about your school day. Tell me about what happened today. And that does usually elicit more than the one word answer. How are you doing? Fine. How was school? Fine. Okay. What did you do today? Nothing. Yeah. So that invitation to tell them is really helpful. And when do you have the conversation, and where do you have it? It's really important to be in a place where you're not necessarily going to be interrupted, so that you have the time to give to that child who may be asking you questions. Do start by explaining to them exactly what you're going to sit down and talk about. So you can say, I guess there are lots of things going on right now, and some of those things might be a little bit scary, or perhaps we don't understand them. So we're going to have a conversation about this, and I want you to feel you can ask me any questions at all. It's okay to ask questions. And that allows the child to be quite relaxed and to know that what they say is going to be taken seriously. Find out about what they know already. So you could say, we've been learning about COVID. Tell me a little bit about what you know about this. They will all know at some level. I have a just 4-year-old grandson who, when this started, first of all, he was in the supermarket before lockdown with his mummy, and someone bumped into his trolley, and he said, please don't do that. You might have coronavirus. You need to wash your hands. That was his understanding for his age and stage, and it was quite appropriate. If they're very young, they may not have heard too much about it, so there's no need to raise it, but simply talk with them about good and safe hygiene, as we did with the little one. Yes, there is this thing called coronavirus. Yes, we do have to be careful. And one of the things that helps to keep us safe is washing our hands properly. Make it into a game for them. Don't make it some big thing that they become obsessed with it all. Just try and say, yeah, that's a really good idea. We really need to wash our hands when we've been shopping, when we've done various things. It helps to stop spreading germs around. Be sure you're located in a place that the child feels confident to talk. Don't make light of their anxieties. Children say some very funny things, and it's often really difficult not to laugh. So, don't make light of their anxieties or avoid them. Address them simply and straightforwardly. Acknowledge their feelings. Yeah, it's okay to be scared about something like this. I, as a grown-up, are sometimes scared, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to feel sad. I sometimes feel sad myself. Those are very affirming to a young child. It makes them believe that they're not the only one experiencing these things. Give them your full attention. Don't get onto the phone or onto your laptop or whatever else you may be doing. Really give them that time, and let them know that they can come and talk to you whenever they're worried or afraid about anything, and that you will listen to them and that you will take them seriously. And when we explain the truth to children, we need to do it in an age-appropriate way. We don't need to bombard them with facts and figures. Just keep it really simple. Use age-appropriate language, and use language that's appropriate for your child. You know the words you use in your household, and they're the words that your child will understand. Remember through all of this that you are the adult, and therefore you have a responsibility to keep them safe. Not just safe from the virus or safe from other things, but safe within their home, safe within their understanding. As an adult, we have the responsibility. If you can't answer their question, tell them that straightforwardly. Say something like, actually, that's a really, really good question, and I don't know the answer for that. Shall we sit down and try and find out that together? Make them feel part of that. And then when you do find the information, again, drip it to them in an age-appropriate way. So we need to show them how to protect themselves and their friends. And as I said earlier, encouraging regular hand washing. Now, I know at home and at school and at nursery, children are encouraged to wash their hands after using the bathroom. But this is much more than this now. It's about washing their hands when they come in out of the garden. It's washing their hands before meals, which they may also do, but it's a heightened alert. So it's constantly reminding them that this is what we have to do without getting at them. You can make the activity fun, particularly with little ones. There's lots of things on social media at the moment about hand washing, and you can see how to put black paint onto their hands and then tell them to get it all off by washing. And it's amazing how much black paint remains. So there are ways of washing your hand that remove it all. Do those with the children. Let them see what you're doing and how you're doing it. Explain to them about covering their mouth when they're coughing and sneezing. Now, I know you probably all do this, but it is worth remembering to do it because we know it, they may not. And also tell them that germs spread this way. And one of the things we're trying to do is stop the germs from spreading. So it is about washing your hands. It is about covering your nose and mouth when you're actually coughing or sneezing. And also tell them, if you're not feeling okay, come and tell me if you're feeling poorly in any way. And offer reassurance. As adults, we hear the news, we see the news, we see distressing images, but we as grown-ups have the ability to separate out from it. We can say, actually, that's not happening in my model of my world. It's happening, but I'm removed from it. But children don't have the emotional maturity to separate out these things. They see people on television, they hear words like how many people have died, and death is a big subject. How do you explain that to a child? You don't say, oh, well, they just went to sleep, because that might mean the child is frightened to go to sleep. It's very difficult, and it's about you and your family knowing what's right for your children, because they can't distinguish what they see on television or online from their own reality. All they hear is, actually, there is a danger out there. This is a dangerous virus and you might die. Well, that to a child is terrifying without putting it into context of all the other things that we do. We also talk about making the time to make your child or help your child manage their stress and distress, because children can feel stressed as well. It's about giving them an opportunity to play and relax. It doesn't have to be all about schoolwork or all about studying. It's about saying we can play, we can have a bit of a chill out as well. But it's also important to keep to their routines as much as possible, particularly around bedtime, because I don't know about you in your household, but many children in the school holidays, of course, are allowed to stay up later. And if you want to do that as a parent or as a carer, that's absolutely fine. But remember, to the child, this is all different. And they will see, well, actually, I can go to bed a bit later tonight, so maybe I can go later still tomorrow. You still have to maintain that routine as much as it's possible to do so. And if you're aware of any COVID-19 cases in your area, remind your children that, yes, there are some things here, but if we're staying in and if we're doing all the proper appropriate things, we're not very likely to catch it. And also, most people who do catch it, they're often really, really sick, but they don't actually die. And also to give them some reassurance, explain that many grown-ups are working together to keep people safe. I know that in windows around the neighbourhood, children have painted the rainbows representing the NHS. They've been standing on doorsteps with you on a Thursday evening until fairly recently, clapping for the NHS. Explain why you're doing that. You're not just standing in the street and clapping. You've been doing it for a reason, and you've been doing it to thank those grown-ups who are working hard to keep us all safe. And explain that this is why they're not at school or nursery or at college. This is why they're at home with you. And this is why they're not seeing their friends in the way that they normally do. And I know many are using social media to keep in touch, and Skype calls and Zoom calls. And those things are great for young children if they have the technology, if they have the laptops or the phones to enable them to do that. But many children don't, and I think we have to remember this. Not every child has access to those types of things. And I think this is a massive thing right now, and this is around stigma. And what's happened around the coronavirus, it's brought with it numerous reports of racial discrimination around the world. We know that people from the BAME community are more likely to get this illness. And it's important to explain to the children that actually being different from us or looking different from us doesn't necessarily mean they will get ill. It's important also to check that your children are not experiencing any bullying themselves or experiencing any discrimination from anyone around them. And again, really importantly, that they're not contributing to any bullying. So have a conversation about respect for difference at an age appropriate level. It's interesting that quite young children don't notice if other children look different from them. They just know them by their name and they don't realize that they look any different because they're accepting. They're far more accepting than adults. So be mindful of your own behavior, your own attitudes and values to difference, because the children will learn those sorts of things from you. And it will take a much longer time when they leave home eventually to get their own experience of the world, rather than the things they've been told by you perhaps when they were younger. And remember, we as adults get our values and attitudes from our parents. So if they were discriminatory in any way, you can bet that some of that would have rubbed off on us. So we have to go into the world ourselves and learn new ways before we can help our children around stigma and spreading stigma and spreading this illness that's going around at the moment in terms of bullying and being unkind to people who don't look quite like us. Explain that the coronavirus has nothing to do with what a person looks like or where they're from. And again, talk a little bit more about bullying and remind them that everybody out there deserves to feel safe. They deserve to feel cared for, treated fairly and equally. And that bullying in any form is unacceptable. Now, I know because we have calls at Care First that often people phone in and explain about their bullying when they were a child, or perhaps their child is going through something like this themselves, and people will often phone and talk to us about it at Care First. Remember that you can do that. It's unacceptable at any age. And it's also important to learn about looking after or looking out for the helpers. Who are they? Who are the helpers out there? And it's important for children to know that people are helping each other at the moment with acts of kindness and generosity. I'm sure if they're seeing the news, they will see when someone comes out of hospital, the whole street turns out to applaud them. They will see perhaps members of the royal household. They've been out there delivering parcels, food parcels to people. Many actors, actresses have been out there doing the same thing. And tell your child, that's what kindness is. It's about being kind to other people. Ask them, do they know what kindness is? And perhaps ask them what they could do to be kind to others. Remember to be very simplistic if it's a younger child, but you can have quite in-depth discussions with children around kindness and what that might mean. And it's also a big comfort to know that compassionate people are taking action and that grown-ups are doing their very best to protect us all. And again, really importantly in all of this is to take care of yourself. If you're being kind to yourself during this crisis and coping reasonably well, then your children are likely to pick up on this, and that's going to decrease their anxiety. If, of course, you're quite anxious yourself or quite worried or experiencing isolation or loss yourself, it's also likely the children will pick up on that. So be open about things. Tell the children if you're feeling tired. Say, you know, we do get tired sometimes. All of us are doing differently. Those of us that are educating children at home, it's not like sending them to school and having that day at work for yourself. Many people have lost their jobs. Many people are worried about their income. And explain, lots of people out there are worried, but equally lots of people are doing their best to keep us all safe and shielded. And try to appear calm and in control and make time for yourself and be more in the moment. Instead of thinking what's happening next week or the week after, concentrate on what's happening today, what's happening now. Think of mindfulness and think about how we are in the moment. How do you respond to things? Are you someone who takes things quite calmly, or are you someone who gets in a bit of a tiz? Try to be calm around the child, because they will pick up on all that hyperactivity if you're feeling not calm yourself. And we talk about closing conversations with care. And bringing a conversation to a close can be as difficult as starting one. So be sure that you're not leaving your child distressed or worried. Make sure there aren't any other questions that they might have for you. Check out how you're feeling about what you've said. They might even want to do a project on it. They might even want to do something on kindness. All of those things are some ways of children getting out the things that they're feeling and can't yet put them into words. So for younger children, that's a really, really good idea. Check with them how they're feeling and ask them, how do you feel about what we've talked about today? Do you need any more information? Is there anything else I can explain to you? Is there anything we can do together? What can we do together in our little family unit? What are you feeling about going back to school? Ask them all of these questions in an open and honest way. But when you're closing the conversation, make sure that it's closed for now. You can tell them that they can come and talk to you at any time. You can make sure they haven't got any questions, and you can remind them that you care, that you're listening, and that you're available whenever they're feeling worried. Now, for lots of children out there, it's very different to have parents or carers at home with them all of the time. And for better and for worse, that's where we are. Many children are enjoying this. Many children are not. Many children are not experiencing being at home in a good, safe environment. Many children are. And it's about remembering that you do care, that you're listening to them, and that you're available when they are feeling worried. Make sure as the adult, you are the adult and you take the adult choices. And remember, if you want to talk to us about this at any stage, you can call Care First at any time during a 24/7 period. You'll go through to a qualified counsellor and they will ask you how this is affecting you. How is it affecting you at home or at work? You will contract to work with the same telephone counsellor if that's what's felt is needed, or you will have face-to-face counselling. And at the moment, of course, we're not delivering that. What we're doing this in time of a Skype call or a Zoom call or some other safety way of speaking with you and actually seeing your counsellor. There's also access to the information services, and we also have a management consultancy and advice service. The information specialists are all ex-CAB workers, and they can have that immediate information and advice that will help you alleviate some of your concerns, particularly if there's a major change around employees and managers, including things like money management issues or debt, consumer issues. And when we first went into lockdown, the information specialists were incredibly busy with people phoning up about the fact they may have lost their jobs, or they wanted more specific information about how to claim benefits, or perhaps they were furloughed and wanted to know the regulations around that. The information specialists were very, very busy at the initial stage of the virus and the lockdown. If you don't want to speak to the counsellor or the information specialist, you have access to the lifestyle site. And on that, there's a wealth of information. On the left-hand side of the page, as you look at it, there are awareness dates, there are articles, and then all the links for these webinars will also be there, so you can view them at a later date. And on the right-hand side, there are things like a wellness assessment or a budget calculator. There's also a stress assessment, an alcohol assessment. All of those things are there for you. And if you need to contact us, just know that you have access to Lifestyle and Zest and Care First. And you would need to look up the Care First number. The reason it's not on here is because most organisations have different numbers, and you need to know what your specific 0800 number is. So we've come to the end of the presentation, and I'm going to ask now if anyone has any questions. There's been a type box there that you can type your questions into. So I'm just going to have a look now and see if we've got any questions. Yeah, we do. Okay, I will do my best to answer as many of these I can. It seems there's been a sound issue with that, which is really difficult, and I'm so sorry about that. You can get your link again to work and can hear this later. Yeah, there's one question here that says it's often hard to explain why we can't use playgrounds when they see other children playing there despite being closed and locked down. Do you know, that is really interesting, and we've had this question about other aspects of lockdown. I can't imagine how difficult it is for your child, to see someone out there and you're telling them they can't go, because they won't understand. And I think it's really important to remember that we have a duty to keep them safe. It's not just about feeding them and keeping them clothed, it's keeping them safe. And hard that it is, we have to explain that they can't use the playground yet because we're not allowed to. And children are pretty good at understanding where rules come from and what they are. And if we say, this is what we're doing, those children aren't, but you are, and that's what we're meant to be doing. Try and concentrate on what you're doing as a family. And someone here has said, what are tips for dealing with anger in children? Well, I would say that let them have a place when it's a place where it's okay to be angry. So that could be in a room. Say it's okay for you to be angry in here. You can shout and scream as much as you like. And when you're calm, you can come down and talk to me. But I'm not going to be there while you're like this. That's one way of doing it. Methods to decrease depression in children. That's difficult because every child is different. I think around depression, it's about talking to children, talking to them and getting them to explain to you why they're worried or anxious in their own little way, getting them to draw and create things. That's also very useful. I'm just checking, are there any other questions here? It seems as though there's been an issue with the sound today. I know I speak quite quietly, but the sound, according to my laptop here, is working fine. As I said, if you want to go to the link and watch it later, you can do so. If you think of any other questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to email us at info@care-first.co.uk, and I will do my very best to answer any questions from you. So that's all for today. I'm going to round it up now and say thank you very much for being here today. And remember, this is just a whistle-stop tour to this, and there are many other ways out there that people can get help, support, and advice. Please feel free to call us at any time. And thank you all very much for your time today. Bye-bye now.